Mitchell, wait, are you in the meeting? Okay. It's using reverse their number. Okay. Let me try. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, no, but you can hear me. Is it clear? How about the other?
I should have been with so.
Hello? Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello? Nudin, can you hear me? Can't hear you. Hello? Can anybody hear me there? Hello?
Hello. Good morning, Mr. Hamzat.
Yeah, now I can hear you. What has been happening to your audio?
So sorry about that. Yeah. We'll be starting shortly. Yeah, thank you for honoring our invitation. We look forward to a very insightful session today. Yeah.
Same here. So can you tell Miriam to share, because I'm going to be using my phone. It seems my laptop is having connection problem. I wanted to use a laptop before, but it's now having some kind of issue. So I have sent the presentation to Miriam. Or are you the one who is going to be managing the platform?
So we have someone, that will be doing that from the back end. So we'll get back to you shortly on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Just tell
All
them
right,
that
all right.
I've shared the presentation
All right.
with them. All right.
All right, all right, all right. You're welcome. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Mr. Ajibola, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Nuruddin, I can hear you.
All right.
Was Miriam able to pull down my presentation?
Yeah, so we are still working on that, but we saw that soon shortly. We're just 2 minutes before we kickstart the session. Thank you for joining the session so far. We hope that before 11 a.m., we have more people joining the call. Yeah, thank you. We're just 2 minutes before we start the session.
He said he had difficulty sharing with his laptop.
Joining the session so far. We hope that before 11 a.m., we have more people joining the call. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I believe you can all hear me. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Collaborative Media Engagement for Development, Inclusivity, and Accountability. That is the C Media training. My name is Nuruddin Salako, Program Officer at the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. I'll be a moderator for today's session. And on behalf of Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, I am delighted to have you, joining this important training session. Of course, it's focused on RUSH for local journalists, strengthening follow-up for accountability reporting. Today's session, we are focusing on a lot of things. One is that we want to strengthen your understanding and accountability in journalism, and also to equip you with tools to develop impactful stories, and also to introduce to you the RUSH framework, which is report until something happens, for structuring and for follow-ups on your stories. Of course, we have two excellent, facilitators with us today, and I will introduce to them as we go into the session. But before we proceed, I would like for us to do a quick housekeeping. The first thing is, please ensure that your video is on, but because of the large numbers of people that we have on board, that might not really be possible. And also importantly, please make sure that your microphone is muted so you're not speaking, and also use the chat box, to drop your questions and comments. And also we are having a dedicated Q&A session after each session. So which means that we have two facilitators for today's training. So after each of their session, we're having a Q&A, for each of them. So please let's bear this in mind. Before we kickstart, let me also say this, that we are beginning the session with the first topic, which is coming from Mr. Ajibola Hamzat, which is about accountability journalism and stories for local impact. Of course, this session will be covering about the fundamental of accountability journalism, and also focusing on the ethical consideration in reporting. That is very, very important. That is the backbone of what the session is also all about. And also we have to identify public interest stories, and also to how to use evidence and data to strengthen your report as a journalist. It's my pleasure to introduce our first facilitator, Ajibola Hamzat, who will be taking us through the session. But before I go into that, Ajibola Hamzat currently serves as the African editor of the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, that is CCIJ, a non-profit organization based in Michigan, that leads global investigation with a focus on strategic mentorship. So his past experience includes working with the Guardian newspaper, a leading publication in Nigerian journalism, and the International Center for Investigative Reporting, that is ICIR in Abuja. Additionally, he has contributed to various news outlets in the United States and South Africa, and he has received multiple awards for his work in journalism. So I would like to invite Mr. Ajibola Hamzat to take over. Over to you, Ajibola.
Thank you very much, Nuruddin. I appreciate your very great introduction. And I also thank Wole Soyinka for inviting me to be part of this training. We'll go right into it because I understand that we don't have so much of time. So I'll be very, very fast about it, believing that the people that I'm speaking with are experienced journalists, or, well, not rookie journalists. So I'll be very fast about some of the issues that I'll be discussing with you this morning. Without the risk of believing that everybody understands what accountability journalism means, I would just want to use 3 punch lines to explain what accountability journalism means. And the reason why I need to do that is that I've been a judge on different journalism awards. And when a request is made to submit accountability or investigative journalism, what people usually submit are stories that does not hold anyone to account. And that is why I want to stress this point, that when we are talking about accountability journalism, precisely, we are talking about the kind of journalism that is intending to hold powerful people to account. So it is not a news story. It is not a feature writing. It is not a prose. It is not interviews. It is trying to hold the powers to account. That is one element that you need to bear in mind. The other principles of accountability journalism is that it usually focuses on exposing wrongdoings. So you need to be able to establish that there are certain wrongdoing that is going on, there's a certain level of corruption that is going on, or there's a certain abuse of power that is going on, and that is why you want to do this story. No more, no less. And the aim for doing this is to make sure that you want to shine light or bring transparency to the issues that you want to expose. So the way I structured this presentation this morning is to, first of all, can you help me share the slide? I'm unable to do that on my phone because my laptop is not connecting. So I would like Wole Soyinka to help me share the slide that I share with them.
All right, we'll do that shortly.
Okay, thank you very much, Nuruddin. So as Nuruddin is trying to put up the slide for everyone to see, there are 3 basic things that I'm going to talk about. I mean, 4, I've already mentioned one. What do we mean when we say accountability journalism? So the other things I want to really focus on is that what are the assumptions that undergird accountability journalism? And then I will talk about the checklist of accountability journalism elements, because when I am looking at the story, there are certain checklists that I've developed for myself over the time, either when I'm doing an accountability story myself, or when I am reading a story that somebody submitted as accountability journalism piece. What are the checklists I always look for? So I provided the checklist that any editor who is looking at your story will want to check to see whether your story measure up to that standard. And then the case study, because we need to get practical about this. So I have a data that I think everybody, I believe we're over 100 here. So there's a data that I will share with all of you. And I hope that everybody will work on that data to produce a story, because it's a story that you can do per state. So about 36 states we have in the country and FCT. So you can do story of your home state, and you can choose the state you are going to do. You can have that arrangement with Wole Soyinka, or you can quickly share it as we discuss along. So what are the assumptions that undergirds accountability journalism? When we say we want to do accountability journalism, what are the assumptions that lead us to doing this kind of reporting? The first assumption is that there is somebody somewhere who has responsibility, or somebody who has an authority. And this authority comes by virtue of the office that they hold. So if somebody holds an official public office, or he holds a powerful position where he has the power to take decision, that kind of a person needs to be held accountable. So responsibility or authority is a first assumption. Does a person, the central character in this story, is somebody who is given certain responsibility to perform, or does he have the authority to perform certain function? That is one assumption. The second assumption is that these particular individuals that we want to investigate, or whose office we want to investigate, do they have resources? Because it is not enough to just say, well, you give somebody authority or power without resources. So if, for instance, you make somebody chairman of a local government, and the chairman of the local government does not have any budget to operate, that person has responsibility and authority but does not have resources. So in what way can you hold that kind of a person accountable if the resources is not provided? So we have to ensure that the person we are trying to hold account has resources at his disposal or our disposal. Then the last assumption is that, does that person have the obligation to carry out that mandate? Because public officials are duty bearers. So if somebody is not obligated to perform a particular duty, it might not be the right person to hold to account. So you want to make sure that the person you are trying to hold account, or the institution you are trying to hold to account, is the institution that has resources, an institution that has a mandate or duty bound to discharge certain functions or deliver on the promises. So those are the assumptions that will make you to determine whether the story that you want to do and the individuals or the institution that you want to report about are those ones that can be held accountable. If they do not have responsibility, or if responsibility is not given to them, or authority is not given to them, if they do not have resources, and if they do not have the mandate or the obligation to carry out that responsibility, then you might as well be wasting your time trying to hold them to account. I hope that is clear. Now, let's talk about the elements that must be present in every accountability reporting. And like I said, I've read several stories that people submitted for e.g. Warishinka Awards. Many of those stories at best can be described as a long-form news report. Some of them very nice feature writing. Majority of those stories that were turned down are stories that does not hold anyone to account. And how do I know that? I look at some of those elements that I mentioned. I have a checklist, and I'm going to discuss that checklist with you. So that when you are doing your story, you can also have that checklist and use it against the story that you are trying to publish. The first thing is to recognize whether the issue that you want to investigate or report or write about is the issue of public interest. It is not every story or issues that are of public interest. So if you are writing a story that is not going to hold any interest to the member of the public, if it has nothing to do with the promise to the people, whether the promise has been broken or something that people should care about, if the issue is not an issue that people care about, then the question of our public interest is not satisfied. So first of all, before you go about wanting to do an accountability reporting, you have to make sure that the public interest is taken care of. And public interest is also at different levels. So if, for instance, I'm writing a story that affects the people mostly in the north, so that means that the interest is only the public, or is only the interest of the people in the north that will be aroused when I'm doing that story. People in the south, Niger Delta, for instance, might not be interested. So if I'm doing a report about the oil pollution, that's a story that might not interest somebody in Gombe or Zamfara, because that is not an issue that is going to be of a public interest to people in that. So you have to also dimension the concept of public interest to know that which public interest are you trying to address in your story. So that is first question to answer And that is one element that must be present in your story. If your story does not have the element of public interest, you can as well just go and do another story. All right. Now, the second element is the element of the actors, the characters in your stories. Who are these people, and how do we identify them? Again, it's my experience that oftentimes journalists, we don't usually properly identify major characters in our stories. So the idea of anonymity, especially to the subject of investigation, does not help your accountability stories at all. Individuals need to be properly mentioned. They need to be identified. And when you are talking about identification, you are not using pseudonym. You are using their names, because these are duty bearers. So you see stories that somebody is investigating a federal agencies, and the person says you should not mention their name, especially when they are the central character in the story. The person has to be mentioned, especially if it's the one involved in the wrongdoing or the abuse of power. So proper identification, naming of characters is very important. Naming of the institution that you are investigating is very important. The officials, and if you are investigating the private companies, a corporate organization, companies, you need to mention them. And if there are intermediaries that are representing them, maybe they are not the principals, but they are the intermediaries, you also need to mention them. That is how you know. That's how we know whom you are trying to hold to account. So the key decision makers, the people who dispose funding, or people who allocate resources, those people need to be properly identified. If I am reading a story and you are saying Mr. XYZ did XYZ, and the name of that person is not in that story, or other identifiers are not present, then the accountability element of your story is going to be very weak. So that is one thing that everyone must note. Identification is very, very important, and proper identification. So you don't mention just one name. You mention the full name of the person, the full name by which the person is known by law, so that even when the person, you don't misidentify the character in the story. So that's very important. The second element that I'm looking for in your accountability story is that how much of evidence is provided in this story. Again, evidence is not statement, because oftentimes we just interview a large numbers of people and we equate that as evidence. That is not evidence. If somebody make a statement is not an enough evidence to establish the truth of your claim. You need to ask the person whether they have documents to support the claim they are making. Is there any conversation that within that person and other people? Can we have contract documents if we are talking about procurement issues? Can we have licenses and permits if somebody is saying that fake license or are being issued, or licenses were not given for certain operations? So you need to have some of these documents. You need to demand for what are the emails, correspondences that has been happening between or among some of the officials that you are mentioning in your stories. So the emails, the invoices, if you are talking about procurement of vehicles or properties and all that, can we have invoices? One of the stories that we were very happy with that I did at the ICR was the story of one agency of the government called Biosafety. We were able to nail them down because we got all the invoices they issued for the procurement of different things. And through that invoice, we were able to establish the inflation of prices. So you might not be able to do that if somebody just saying that, oh, the permanent secretary or the director general inflated the prices of XYZ. The statement is not enough because people also have their own agenda. You want to ask them, do you have invoices to establish or to prove the claim of the inflation of prices? Or do you have databases that you can rely on? And I'm going to share a database with you guys today with which you can do a very good story. And you can always make a request through the FOI or public request records. So this is very important as evidence. If I don't have documents, if I don't have public records, if I don't have documents, procurement, contract, permit, I will be looking for the evidences that support all the statements and claims and voices in your story. So evidence is one of the checklists that I will look for when reading your story. The other thing I will look for is probably the data. Are there any data that are supporting the story that you are doing? There's a story CCIJ is currently doing. We are making a big claim. But the journalist on his own is unlikely to be able to establish that claim because it requires extensive research. But we're now asking that, okay, if you don't have a research, at least if you cannot do your own research on this particular story, do you have some data that some people have collected that can help us to link the claim with the evidence? So if you have some of the data that some people have already collected, or some report that some other people have done, scientific reports, that could serve as an evidence. So data and the analysis of data is very, very important. It could be a quantitative data, it could be a qualitative data. Whatever data that you have, I would like to see. It could be the number of years of budgets that has been submitted, or the timelines, or the outcomes, or comparison, or some reproducible data method that some people have used in carrying out research in the past. It's very important that data supports the story that you are doing. So when you are doing accountability story, statements, documents is not enough. You also want to look for numbers. Does number support? Does your story add up mathematically? So that is where the data comes in. The other checklist I will be looking for in your story is the number of sources. And I'm not going to mention names. I have read stories of senior colleagues that when you check the number of voices in their story, a very important story, you might not find more than 3 or 4 voices in that story. That is not good enough for accountability or the story that wants to hold powerful people to account. You want to make sure you bring diversity of voices. So I want to see how many sources are in your story. So if you don't have multiple sources, and if those sources are not varied, that you are only talking to men, and you are not talking to women, or that you are only talking to old people, you are not talking to younger, that could actually make your story to be problematic. So when you are thinking of sources, you think of different types of people that will be speaking in your stories. You want to make sure that they are as varied as possible. And you want to make sure that majority of the voices in your story or people speaking in your story are people who are willing to speak on record. Again, the way for me to quickly establish the weakness of a story is when I see many voices in the stories and most of those people are speaking off record. I mean, it could mean that, yes, these are real people. But it could also mean that the journalists also fabricate those voices. And journalists do that, let's not lie. Not only in Nigeria, as far back as in the US. The classical example is the story of the cook woman who won a Pulitzer Prize with her story. And it turned out that the story and all the people who spoke in that stories are fabricated. So I want to ensure that the voices that you are quoting in your story are voices or the sources that I can identify or that I can find. So on the record sources are better than off the record sources. Of course, I recognize the fact that some sources might want to speak off record, especially if somebody has a very important information to give you and say that if I give this information on record, my job is going to be I will lose my job, or it might harm my family, or it might harm myself doing that. So I recognize the relevance of off-record. I've granted off-record interview to people have granted off-record interview for me. But the best thing to do in that circumstance is, okay, if you are speaking to me off-record, can you also identify somebody who has the same kind of information that you have, but who has the power to speak on record? That is how to negotiate that kind of a situation when somebody decides that he's going to speak to you off record. There are whistleblowers, there are experts. All these voices are very important in a story that is meant to be an accountability report. Then another key checklist that I want to make sure that is present is most of the claims and the evidences that this person provides, are they verified? Or can they be corroborated? Because somebody might give you an information and you find out that that information is probably untrue, even though that person is in the position to give you that information because he is the person who should know. But he might be playing you or he might have his own agenda. And that is why it's always very important to seek corroboration. So if somebody tells you that the inflation is rising by XYZ%, you want to also make sure that that particular claim is corroborated. In fact, every claim needs to be corroborated because you don't know how people are going to respond to your story when it is published. We have a particular situation in the organization that I work for now, when one of the sources, a very central character in our sources, and is an American, we send him a number of questions to respond to that we are doing XYZ kind of stories. And he is already preparing a litigation material that if you guys come out with this story, this is what I'm going to do. We have not published the story. So there are some sources like that, that once a story is out, even when they know they are not going to win the case in court, they will still take you to court in order to harass you, in order to intimidate you, and in order to censor you next time. So you want to make sure that every claim in your story are properly verified so that even if that person takes you to court eventually, you are not going to put your organizations in serious legal costs. So verifications and corroboration is very, very important. You need to cross-check, you need to corroborate different witness accounts, and you need to check different chains of materials that people provide for you. The other checklist that I would always want to also look for is, are there any legal materials that we can reference in the story? Is there any law, enactment, or policy documents that we can reference in the story? The reason why you need to reference law or policy is to establish that certain breaches of law is happening. Because when you are making a claim that a wrongdoing is taking place in a particular organization, you want to reference laws, you want to reference legal instruments to make the claim that somebody is breaking the law and this person deserves to be questioned or deserves to be, prosecuted. So it's always very important to reference provisions of the law or policies or any other legal instruments that can make your case to be very strong. So I will look for that. So if you're telling me that somebody is mismanaging the funding, I will begin to look what law prevents this particular official from mismanaging the funding. It is not all the law that can make that happen, but there are some certain laws. And in some cases, you might not find law, but you might find policies. So you need to look for which policies and which law that particular person is breaking. We are almost rounding off on this side to get into the practical. I will spend the next 5 minutes to quickly talk about this, and then we'll get to the practical. The next on the checklist is what response and how do you seek response? Some people are too timid. Some of our colleagues are too timid to reach out to the public officials and confront them. And oftentimes when we confront them with questions that is not going to solve our story or that is not going to strengthen our story. And I'm going to say to you that if you are going to talk to anybody or get response from any public officials, the best way to do it for us is for you to, all the findings that you have already collected, you have done research, you have done checks, you have collected documents, you have probably seen data, and then you have made some findings. It is a finding that you should take to the public officials. Don't go and be asking the public officials that, can you tell me about the implementation of the 2025 budget? What is the percentage performance of the 2025 health budget? That person is going to dribble you, because that is what they are trained to do. Rather, you will say that we have checked through the budget of the 2025, and we have realized that your agency has not implemented up to 60% of that budget. Now you are asking that particular official specific questions based on your findings. So you are not just throwing the net into the ocean and hoping to catch whatever fish that comes across. You want to make sure that you are asking them specific questions based on what you have found. So it is your finding that must guide the question you are going to present to the public officials. And that's how you can get a response. And oftentimes, because again, some surveys that have been done in several investigations done by Nigerian journalists shows that many public officials don't respond. So it is not unlikely that when you confront them, they are not going to respond to your questions and all that. It is okay. Just make sure that you document all your outreach. And if you can also cite the violations of the law that that person is breaching by refusing to speak to you, because there is a law that also supports free provision of public information. If what you are seeking for is a public information held by a public official, then that public official has a duty to provide that information. But if you now fail to provide that, you need to also cite the law that person is breaching, so that you can try to make the case of that person more, difficult to defend when the story is out. That will reach out to you and you stonewall or you avoided us. And these are all the efforts that you have made to reach out to you. And in failing to do this, this is a section of the Freedom of Information Act that you're also breaching. So it is important we also cite that. Oftentimes, most of the reports that I've read, we usually don't cite that relevant part of the FOI law that most of these fellow are breaching. So I will look for how you take care of the responses, the question that you ask, how you ask the question. And if the person does not give you a response, I will also want to know how you handle that. So that's another checklist, list on my checklist. Then, how did you take care of the sources in your story? Harm. Because we have journalists, we have done stories several times that really puts our sources in harm's places. Like I said, it is not all sources that you also need to identify in your story. There are some sources that the very moment you mention their name, you can be sure that you are putting their life at risk. Those kind of sources, you need to make it very clear to them that this information you are providing is very, very important. If your name is mentioned, it might put you in trouble. Is there any other person who can officially speak to this issue? And so when somebody is giving you an information about drug dealings, maybe as a member of the inner members of the cartel, you want to be sure that that person is also protected. It's part of the duty of care that we have as a journalist for some of the sources. So I want to see how well you take care of your sources in the story and making sure that the story that you are doing does not honestly expose anybody to danger. The rest, it's what editors can fix. The editor can help you fix how you structure your story, how you what you are leading the story with, what your knot graph looks like, and what you need to put in your knot graph, evidences, and once all the things that I mentioned are there, the editor can actually fix the structure. But as a journalist, as a reporter, you also must have the understanding of the narrative acts of an accountability reporting. And what do I mean by that? If a story is going to hit a point, if a story is going to make a very strong, compelling note, you must know how to structure your story. So there is something called narrative arc. The narrative arc is about how do you begin your story to capture the attentions of your audience, and how do you include your knot graph. The knot graph is usually the key element of your story, the kernel of your story. And you must make sure that you quickly include that kernel in your story before you go into the heart of the story. So at what point do you put that? All those things are very elements. A good editor can help you structure that, but you as a reporter, you also need to know when to lead, how to lead, what to lead with, and when does knot graph comes in, and how do you build the argument into your story that supports all the claims that you make in your knot graph, and how do you balance it, all the responses and the context, and how do you conclude? All those things are very, very important, and it is the elements that we always look at. In the organization that I work for, CCIJ, I work at the African Editor at Center for Collaborative. One of the key elements, when everything in your story is complete, then we'll look at, do you have very great visuals that tell the story? So it is not just photograph for photograph's sake. And most of us, we just go and take the photograph of different people and just splash it on our story. Your photograph must also tell compelling story if you want to record any impact. Oftentimes, we just take care of the text, but we don't take care of the visuals. So it is important that the visuals you are providing also tell the story you are telling with words. In fact, we're told in journalism school that a photograph is worth 1,000 words. So you must make sure your visuals are very, very deliberately taken, not just any photograph. And the same thing with the data, the map, the chart that you are using to tell the story. And that is why I advise, especially if you're an editor in the newsroom, it's always important to have somebody who thinks about data. Because data is not just about number, and it's not all data that are relevant. You can tell a data story without even using too many words. There are ways this data can be built into your story. And that's why for every newsroom that wants to be recording impact, you need the advice or the guidance of a visual of data editor to support what you are doing. Now let's get down to, so these are the elements. If you follow this element, you cannot miss it. If you follow these checklists that I share with you religiously, I bet you are not likely to be, your copy is not likely to be thrown away next time you submit your story, say to Wole Soyinka Awards or to other awards in the land, or even to awards outside Nigeria. I bet you. Just make sure that you follow some of these checklists. Now let's get down to case study. And the case I need you guys to work on. I provide an historical data, and the link is here on the case study. I put a link. Open that link, and what you are going to see is the data of the Basic Health Care Provision Fund. I got that list from a colleague who works in the Ministry of Health. We're having conversation, and he told me that, do you know that we have this data, and many journalists have not been interrogating this data? Even though as ministry, we want journalists to interrogate this data and tell us what is missing. And I've looked at that data and I've seen a lot of things that are missing. And that is why I decided to share that data with you. So you are going to see the link right there. Please use the link. It's on Google Doc. I think it's open. So if you are not able to open it, please let me know. I can download and share you the direct or share with Wole Soyinka that I will share with you. So, like I said, this data is the data of the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund in Nigeria. Let me give you some background, because you need to understand the background for you to be able to use that data meaningfully. So BHCPF, Basic Healthcare Provision Fund, was part of the law that Jonathan passed in 2014. And that particular law was meant for health financing. In fact, it was part of the National Health Act that Jonathan, enacted in 2014. So that particular law provides a basic minimum package of health service for every Nigerian through public and private facilities. And the hope is to allow every Nigerian to access healthcare, at least basic healthcare. So at the PHC, and we have about, I think I'll get the number of our PHC that we have in the country at the moment. So the idea is for all the primary healthcare in Nigeria to be able to provide drugs and to be able to provide medical treatments. And so the 1% of federal government revenue was always taken. I will spend 5 minutes more, Nuruddin, then I will stop so that you can ask questions. So just give me 5 minutes, because I'm taking time too. It's 11:40. Just give me 5 more minutes to run through this. So 11% of federal government revenue and some international donors like Bill Gates and the rest of them, and the state governments are also meant to provide funding. So it is these 3 levels of funding that actually form the package, the basic minimum package of health service that primary healthcare in Nigeria are meant to provide. The objective of this money, first, is for the national private healthcare development to facilitate access of every Nigerian to health, as I mentioned. It also provides some kind of insurance for every Nigerian, and is also meant to prevent diseases like fighting against pandemics that happened in 2019 to 2022, COVID. So that is why that funding was established. The primary focus of the funding, as I said, is meant to improve specifically maternal and child health. So all the issues affecting women and children in Nigeria are not supposed to be happening if that fund is provided adequately and is provided regularly. So the funding is not meant to build new PHC. The funding is meant to train the staff of the PHC on the modern medicine that can improve maternal health and child health, and ensuring that drugs are available at local level. That is what that story, the funding is meant for. And as we speak today, there are over 17,600 PHC. So all of these primary healthcare centers, they are spread across 36 states of the Federation, including FCT. So the idea is that by 2027, just next year, every PHC is supposed to be functional as a functionally expected PHC. But is that what we see today in most of the PHC, primary healthcare center? The answer obviously is no. And that is why I'm sharing that data, so that you look at the data and then you go back to your own state. And you can select any state of your interest, depending on where you are located, and begin to use that data to ask questions. And some of the questions that you want to ask is, first, are there basic drugs in all the PHC in your home state? Or you can say your own local government, because let's narrow it down to our local government. The drugs that are meant to be available in the local government, are there drugs as we speak now? The mortality rate that the funding is meant to prevent or reduce, has that happened? Because we have just 1 year for all these things to happen. Don't forget, these things started in 2014. The funding has been coming since 2014, and now we have just 1 year to ensure that all that is happening. So what is the child mortality rate in our PHC in your own local government area? I want to know how much donor contribution added to this funding. What you have here is the contributions of the Ministry of Health and the donor. How much of this is federal government actually contributing? How much is the state contributing? Those are the questions that you need to raise with that data. Your state, what is your governor contributed in the last 5 or 10 years? I would like to know. And what states actually contribute the lowest? I have a number of questions that you can ask. And these are the basis from which you can begin a story. So please play with the data and try and see how many stories or angle of the story that you can bring out. And I hope that in the next 1 or 2 weeks, many of us are going to be sharing the links to our story with Wole Soyinka, that this is a story that I've been able to produce. And I charge Wole Soyinka to also monitor these stories, because at least not fewer than 36 stories can come out from this data. I thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr.
You can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you, Nube. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this insightful session, and really appreciate. And now we can have our participants to drop their questions and comment on the Q&A so that we can have as much as possible. Right. You've said a lot about, this accountability journalism. You talked about that it should be of public interest, because that should be the baseline, that should be the foundation of the accountability journalism that they want to, to write about. The story must be of public interest. So we need to ensure that as local journalists, we have to make sure that our stories are of public interest. And also we have to identify our key stakeholders in the report as well, just like what you mentioned. So, you mentioned a lot of things, and I hope that our participants are also, taking notes and try to, incorporate all those things in their report. And also you talk about the evidence that is about, it should be of data laden, their report, not just about text. So let us see, what the data is saying, and they have to work with evidence, right? And these evidence are what they were to take to, to politicians or people involved. Let's say policymakers and all sorts. So with all of these data, they can be able to interrogate, and just like we said, that they may not, respond to them, right? But that's why we have the FOI that most likely, as research has shown, that they don't, respond. But the fact remains that it should be documented that yes, they make an effort and all of this. So it is very important that these are the things that our local journalists must, ensure that, reflect in their, accountability reporting and journalism. And also talk about the diversity of sources, as more sources, as more relevant it is, for them to work on that and things like that. And I also talked about the importance of visuals. Now, it's not just about long text, it's about having visuals to, to explain, just like what you said about, journalism training that you had, that a picture tells over 1,000 stories, 1,000 texts, right? So what? So these are very, very important, for journalists. And when you're trying to hold people accountable, or, it is very important we have this pictorial evidence, graphics, and just to give people a sense of, what is really happening and what you are trying to, to fill the gap for social justice and social change. So it's very, very important. So let us have our comment and, questions so that we can have Mr. Hamzat to do justice to that. So please drop your questions in the Q&A box. It's very, very important. Okay, someone is saying, please, can we have the slide after the training? Yeah, of course. We are going to do that. Yeah, after the training. I can't download the doc. Please share. Of course, we are going to do that. So we are going to share with you the slide of this presentation so that you can also try to do a follow-up, a step down about it, and trying to, inculcate all these training you are enjoying now. And good morning. Please, can you help us drop the link here? Yeah, so we are going to drop the link from the case study that Mr. Hamzat shared with us. We are going to share that with you shortly. Yeah, so let's keep it coming, your comments, your questions. We have 10 minutes for this session. Okay, I think Olushenka should share. Okay, I don't see the link. Yeah, so we are still waiting for your comments, for your questions. I know that he has said a lot of things, but I'm very sure that there will be some gaps that you want to clarify. What you don't understand, what you want our facilitator to talk about. Maybe in simpler terms, or maybe for more in-depth explanation. So this is the opportunity for you to do that. Ask your questions. Yes, ask your questions and let's go. So while we are waiting for their questions and comments, Mr. Hamzat, you really did a lot of justice to this, even with this case study of a thing, and hopefully we are expecting our participants to do something on that and let us see what they can come up with, because this is also more of practical, because the essence of this training is for local journalists to be able to adopt these things that we are training them about, because it is very, very important. We have had a lot of things, but the fact remains that how can we make this social change and social justice, through accountability journalism? So it's not just about the theoretical part now, it's about the practicality of all this, this training. And from your case study, we can give them an insight, to how they can go about it, what you've mentioned about this checklist and how they can do all of these things. So it is very, very important for local journalists, even for all journalists, but for the fact that we are having them in this room, we are focusing on local journalists. Yeah. Yeah. So we are all right.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that I've shared the data with Miriam, and Miriam can download it and share with everyone. So what you are going to find in the data my system, it's like I said earlier, it's just messing up today. So, but what you are going to find in the data is combinations of funding that the federal government has been shared with each state. I think from 2019, my system is not showing. Everything is just messy. But you are going to have it till 2025. I am trying to ask them at the Ministry of Health to see if they can have this thing up to 2026. So if you have any problem downloading the data, let me know. I will make sure that I get that data across to you. But the goal for me is that I want to see nothing less than 36 stories from this data.
All right. We hope to follow up on that and get that. So we have a question for you, Mr. Hamzat. So good morning, Mr. Hamzat. Thanks so much for your wonderful presentation. That is coming from the participant. So what if your source or sources comes out to later deny some of the evidences and information he or she has given, even if the evidence are factual? So if the person is asking that, where we have a situation whereby the source give you those information, perhaps maybe due to threats or something like that. At the end of the day, it is trying that I didn't give you the information. Where do you get that information from or something? And we knowing fully well that this person gave out that information and he gave out that information. So how can we do that as a local journalist or as a journalist as a whole? That how can we, when in a situation whereby our sources denied giving us that particular information, even when those information are factual, but they are denying that they give us that information? How can we deal with that?
Yeah, thank you very much. That happens many times. Sources tend to want to deny any piece of information they have given to you, probably when they discover that giving out that information might no longer serve their interest. Or, I mean, look at the case of this woman and Umai, who after some time, recounted. So when a source realized that giving you a piece of information might no longer serve her interest, and she might come to you and deny it. And I've had many of my newsroom reporters coming back to say that, look, the information this person gave to me she's now saying that we should not publish the information again. And you ask, what is the reason? Probably the person has promised to take care of the problem that she pointed out in our interview. So that happened. But the good thing that I always encourage our journalists to do is that document all the interaction with sources. So there are different ways you can document that. In the age of technology, you can record, and it's always good to record. But recording is not enough. You can also, recording electronically is not enough. You can also write. If you have a journalist diary or notes, take your notes. In court, your notes is also admissible. So if you can take a copious note, it's even good. In the past, journalists are taught how to do stenography. So you can write very quickly and all that. So make sure you write down, make sure you record, and make sure that if you can do some of the conversation through WhatsApp, when even the timeline, the timestamp of the conversation can be captured. So always think of different ways by which your interaction with the sources are documented. Documentation is very important. So if you document your interaction very well, your correspondence, learn to send mails to people, get their email and send mails to them. Send messages to them on either SMS or WhatsApp. Many of you already do that. So if you do that, it will be very difficult for that person to now say, no, I wasn't the one who said that, or I didn't say that again. That would be too stupid for anybody to disclaim.
All right, thank you so much for that. So the bottom line is document all the interaction with your sources. So it can be through written, through recording, through mails, through WhatsApp messages, and also just to make sure that you have something, to fall back to, so that whenever the cases arises. Thank you so much. So we have another question here, though it is 10 minutes already for this Q&A session, but let me just try to, put this in. So the presentation is instructive. How easy is the checklist implementable in Nigeria within the context of the growing public space in the country? So the person is asking that, okay, with this, your checklist that you shared with them, right? So how easy it is to implement that in Nigeria in the context that the growing public space in the country? So the person just wants to have a clear idea of how he or she can be able to adapt, this your checklist according to the person. Yeah, that is the question. So I think if you can help us to do this in 1 minute.
What is not implementable in the checklist? That when you want to do a story, you make sure that the story is of public interest and you are not doing a story in the personal interest. Because some people are going to ask you to do a story, but you realize that story is going to serve a narrow interest. So doing a story in public interest is not something that you will say is not implementable. That's implementable. And when we ask that you ensure that you identify all the characters in your story, that is central characters, people who are involved in the wrongdoing, you need to do that. Oftentimes, the people we identify in our stories are victims. They did this to him, they killed his children, they destroyed his family. But who did it? Who are the people that are responsible for those wrongdoing? We usually don't focus on that. So that is where I've read several stories of rape and gender-based violence. People are just describing, the victims and what happened to victims. But what about the person who raped the victim? Does he not have a name? So how is that not implementable in Nigeria? So I think we also need to deal with the issue of lazy reporting, because I also see that a lot. And when I see lazy reporting, one of the ways for me to know is when you are just trying to avoid naming some characters who are supposed to be held accountable in your stories. I say, it's a symptoms of lazy reporting. So it is implementable anywhere. It now requires the enterprise and the doggedness of journalists to make sure that is possible, except if you can point out one element that is not implementable. But in any case, that is what most experienced editor will look out for in your story. If it is not there, then you don't have an accountability reporting story.
All right.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks so much. So if it is not there, that means that you are not doing any accountability stories. Thank you so much, Mr. Ajibola, for this wonderful, insightful session. And we now need to move on to the next session. And now we are having our ED. She will be talking about Rush stories, structuring for impact and follow-up. This session is focusing on the Rush framework, for story development, and also how stories, structure stories for clarity and for impact. It is my pleasure to introduce our second facilitator, Moturayo Alaka. Moturayo Aduni Alaka is the Executive Director and the CEO of the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. She is a globally recognized executive leader, investigative journalism advocate, and democracy practitioner whose work sits at the intersection of ethical leadership, civic accountability, and inclusive governance. With more than 2 decades of experience, she has built and sustained institutions that defend the public interest, strengthen democratic culture, and empower communities through credible storytelling. She is a John S. Knight Fellow of Stanford University and a Harvard-trained executive in public leadership. Thank you so much, Moturayo Alaka, for joining this session. Now over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nuruddin. First, I would like to thank Ajibola Hamzat for joining us for this training. It's always a breath of fresh air to listen to him teach and share from his knowledge on journalism, investigative journalism, and the issues that affect the work that we do as journalists for public interest and for building democracy. So thank you. It's a pleasure and it's a privilege to share the stage with you. I struggled a bit to join this meeting. Like Ajibola, I could not sign in on my laptop, and eventually, so I missed some parts of his presentation, but I was listening in as an attendee for some parts. So I got also the end of it. I would say that just like the schedule for this training shows, this session is a continuation of the session Ajibola gave to us, just took. So just consider that you paused, you were watching a series and you paused and then you watched up to series 5 and to series 10. So now you are in the 6th series. So it's a continuation. And I say that because he has laid fundamental foundation for what I want to speak to. What I want to speak to, the Rush framework is not, or model, if you care, is not a model that is isolated from the fundamentals of journalism. You still have to do all the groundwork. You must provide evidence. It is that and more. We're asking that after you've done everything that Ajibola said, which I'm sure you all know, we are only trying to share the best we can within the short time that we have. People go to school to do masters in investigative reporting. People study investigative reporting as courses over a 4-year period of university. So a 2-hour virtual course can only scratch the surface, but it is important that you know that everything that he has said is the foundation on which I am making this presentation. It's not outside it. It's not something that is extraordinary and totally a new introduction. What the Rush strategy and model does, as I get into my presentation, is that, and I hope that you can see the slides, is the team sharing the slides, because I'm seeing my own slides from the system, but I'm not able to share slides on the phone. So I hope, Nuruddin, can you confirm that the participants
All right.
can see?
Yeah. So we are working on that. Yeah, it will come up shortly.
Okay. So the first slides talks to the Rush framework or model of strengthening follow-up for accountability reporting.
Yeah, it is now up now.
I've seen it.
Yes.
And Rush means report until something happens. And this is with focus on local journalists and local journalism as a whole, because there are journalists who are not based in a local newsroom or who do not have an hyper-local platform, but they do community and local focused stories. They are legacy media organizations who do local journalism coverage. So the breadth of that. I start by mostly, saying that the Rush model is something that I had the pleasure of designing more than 15 years ago. And it came from quite a number of more than 15 media monitoring research that I personally designed and led. And at over 20 year, at that time, maybe about 5-year experience in about 5-year experience in journalism at that time. But I've continued to improve on the model and framework over my 20-year career. And it is within the journalism, the scope of journalism. It is not an extraordinary thing. You hear a lot of things you've heard before. And what the Rush model does is that out of all the research and training and working with journalists and newsrooms and editors and being able to commission, if I want to be modest, WSIJ has commissioned at least 1,000 stories. So being able to commission that quantum of stories, all of that experience brought me to one major conclusion, which created Rush. And it is that often our journalism lacks strategy. Adebola was speaking to the fact that in choosing pictures, you have to be intentional. You don't just slam a picture on a story. You don't just put the president's face on it because the president is the one you are holding accountable. You don't just put the Inspector General of Police, which is what we do mostly in our journalism. We just put maybe the person we believe should be accountable. We put the face of the person there. But the face of those who are the humans in the stories are missing. So often, if you even look at the online platforms, go to your home media organization, the website and also the digital platforms, you just scroll through. I think online it is worse, because most people who handle our digital platforms are not journalists. So please stay on slide 2. I'm on slide 2. They are not journalists. So if you just scroll through just pick any media and just scroll through their online page, you say, a particular case, you just see random pictures, because nobody's planning, nobody's understanding that online platform has 1 million followers or has maybe 50,000 followers or 20,000 followers. But the way that the algorithms work and the platforms work, reach, your followers might be 2,000, but your reach might get to, on one particular post, it can get to up to 10,000, it can get to up to 100,000 because of the way the algorithm. So nobody is thinking intentionally about those things. So the lack of strategy is what Rush seeks to address. It seeks to put some strategy and some structure around, investigative story, follow up, and looking forward to having impact on stories. So what is the problem? The news circles, is about novelty. The ADC convention just holds. There is a missile that was dropped in a community, at the border of so and so state, and 50 people are dead. So it's about what's new, and that's what's the definitions of news teach us that it's what's new. But novelty is not enough. Some of the issues that we're talking about today, the health issue that Adebola used as an example, for instance, they have been with us from the start of humanity. As a country, they have been with us, some of them, from our independence. They have been with us for long. They are not quite novel. They are not new things, but they are important issues. And we find that government often likes outrage. One thing that shifts government, that makes the person in power, politicians, listen, is outrage. See how many meetings the presidency and other governors held. See how many of them, ministers and co, who are normally unavailable, were able to quickly get to the toll gate during the NSAS protest. So outrage gets the attention of politicians. However, as journalists, because of the nature of our work and as a people, we move on. There's a breaking news, and in an era of all things broken in news, that's a conversation for another day. Everybody talks about it today. And if it's a very strong story, it can last a week. And if it continues to be a story like, the case of, El-Rufai and all that, an ongoing case, people will continue to just mention it. But the verve the strength, it dies down and people, the audience soon forget about it. So again, sustained pressure, and the problem is that we are not able to give sustained pressure. So follow-up matters, and I'm glad that I doubt that there can be any teaching on accountability journalism that will not have follow-up as part of it, because it matters. And what the Rush model is teaching is what I call economics of demand and political economics of demand and supply, which is that the demand for accountability, the demand for better services, the demand for good governance, the demand for a working democracy, the demand for, safety, freedom of the press, the demand for freedom of association, name it, the demand for good health services in our communities, good primary health centers in our communities, it will affect the supply. When the people are complacent, politicians love it. They just continue life as usual. When the people ask questions, we gave you 100 billion. What happened to it? Where is the school? You said that you are commissioning a school that can take, Lagos State commissioned a school in the Adiriomi Felodo area. They were renovating it, and they said, oh, this school, I think they said can take 10,000 or so. I don't have the figures in my head now, but it was in its thousands. Now, which journalists will go to that place and actually count the number of schools? Maybe on a day they are doing a PTA meeting, or they are doing, because normally to get into a school premises is not as easy. They are doing coaching, or you go with other events, and you actually count the number of classes. You try to have an average, number of students, and you actually calculate to see how many students actually are in these classes. And you demand, you question government on it. And then you look at the population of students in that area that the school is supposed to be servicing. That is a story idea for somebody who is interested. The school is supposed to be servicing. And then you match it with, the number they said they have built, the number that is the reality, and the fact that there's a gap between their promise and our reality. And, then the people, quickly, the government will wake up. And we've seen that happen. I always cite, Sharon Jason's story in Ikorodu, where she went to the Bethel school. That school serves, it's a 50-year, it was at that time of publication, I believe that was 2017 or 2018. It was a 50-year-old school at the time. And it was serving 7 communities according to our report. And she found that, it was dilapidated, it was not in good state. And because she wrote, there was some outcry from the community. And within 6 months, the Lagos State government rebuilt the school. They renovated it, and Sharon was then called to a hero's welcome. It wasn't that interesting when she first went. The head of school was not happy with her, but because she made a difference. So it's not just about following up. And then she went back after the school was built. So follow-up that we're talking about is for when you've published a story to make sure that you get impact. But when there is impact, when, for instance, the school you checked up, that government said would take 20,000 people, you found out that it can only take 6,009 people. And then government makes expansions, or they make additional investments. And then the school now actually can take more than, the 20,000 people that they promised. You also have a duty of follow-up. One of the reasons why news sustainability is difficult is that sometimes we just stick with the gloom and the doom. But sometimes there are development milestones. So you follow up that. And when you don't follow up, the story is quite, unfinished. I wanted to quickly introduce to you the CMedia project that, we are doing this under, which is our collaborative media engagement for development, inclusivity, and accountability. It's a project, I won't go deeply into it, but it's a multi-level project. The image in front of you is what explains the project. We're covering all levels of governance, but our major focus was on state and local government. We're covering public and private sector, but we also really were intentional about private sector, because often private sector is not held accountable for the things they do that are public service. We're covering people, but especially we're covering the minority groups, women, youth, persons with disability, and a number of issues. And for that project, and it's an ongoing project for us, we have a core 26 organizations that we support. Most of them news organizations that are based in local communities or focus on local journalism. We supported them with, grants, with governance, corporate governance skills, with investigative reporting, mentoring, and all of, the networking, building investigative journalism desk. We're happy to report that a number of those media organizations, many of them indeed, are doing well, and they are sustained. And we also built investigative journalism desk for some legacy media organizations like, Television Continental, The Nation, just to improve, investigation in those organizations. I just wanted to introduce, what C-Media is to us, to the people who may not have heard about it. The rush, like I said, is report until something happens. And it's saturation journalism. And it's leveraging, collaboration, technology. And like I said, that Ajibola's presentation, my presentation is just a continuation of it. It's about public interest. It's not about the reporter becoming more popular or the reporter just being a rabble-rouser. It's about public interest. Investigative reporting is not witch hunting. It is holding power accountable. And when power accounts, we also hold ourselves accountable to report, that it is about structured, purposeful follow-up. I'll move a bit faster because of the other slides. So we want to reframe journalism. We want to ensure that our stories have outcomes, that a story becomes a means to an end, not, an end in itself. A lot of times we publish stories and we say, oh, well, I've done my part. I've published the story. I always remember Temitayo Famotimi, now Dr. Temitayo Famotimi. He was at Punch as a reporter when he won the Wole Soyinka Award, and he had done a story on the virginity test, was the title of the story. And I always remember that story because it was a 12-part series. 12-part series. So the attention came, and because he kept reporting until something changed. So again, I had mentioned that report until something happened. The slogan is new. It's something I created. And then I put strategy and structure based on the gaps that I've seen. But the components, they are not new. They are not new. They are things, they are the work of journalists, work that journalists in the past have done, journalists right now are doing, but which I'm saying we need to do more often because we have an existential crisis as a country, as a continent, and increasingly as a globe. But as a country, we have major existential crisis. Just yesterday, we were speaking at our Journalism and Society conversation about electricity and accountability journalism. And we find that, in that sector, Nigeria's performance is less than 10%. That is being generous. So how do we talk about development if we don't talk about that? So Rush came from a place, for me, from a place of frustration. After 5-6 years of supporting investigative journalists, giving so many awards, doing groundbreaking investigations, celebrating groundbreaking investigations, supporting journalists to learn from other journalists from around the world, I was just frustrated at that the change on the streets did not match, the efforts of not just Wole Soyinka Center, but the many organizations that do this work. The International Center for Investigative Reporting that I think at the time that I even created Rush, maybe ICIR was either just starting but so many, all the media organizations that existed, because even for investigative journalism, WSID always likes to clarify, we did not start investigative journalism in Nigeria. It existed long before. What we did was to build a culture around it, to stay long enough for it to be popular and for there to be focus on it. So when you look at all of that effort, I'm just frustrated that the vulnerable person is still very uncomfortable in this country. It is, if whatever side you are on, even if you are somebody who is politically inclined, I think as a country we can agree that we are not doing well. We can agree that this is not the normal. And if we can agree on that, then from our own side of the accountability, what can journalism do? So this is really born out of a pain point, like people's lives need to be better. Public interests they actually need to have their interest attended to. Schools have to run as schools, sectors, health sector has to run as health sector. You know, that is, you know, the place where this comes from. So I'm moving on to talk about 4 quick pillars that you might have heard many times, but again, structure. You have to be persistent. You have to think of, I'm now on slide 8. You have to be structured. You have to be persistent. You have to recognize community, not just the journalism community, because the Rush model is speaking to acknowledging the ecosystem of journalism. That journalism is not an endeavor in isolation. It's an endeavor that connects to so many other endeavors and so many other places. I'm on slide 8. And then you have to think of collaboration. And then you have to be measuring, you know. You have to be looking. If you are not using the thorough monitoring, evaluation, and learning measurements of those of us that work in journalism and also work in civil society, you have to at least be tracking. Sometimes, you know, there are awards and the reporters cannot even find their stories. They can't find evidences of their own stories. So if you don't have evidence of your story, how do you have the evidence of the source who denies that you spoke to them? You have to be measuring. You have to be tracking. So, and I share more about that. Let me move on. So a major part of Rush is that I speak to 2 major communities. And again, this is a reality. I'm just trying to bring structure. And I'm working very hard to see, you know, how our theories accepted by the academia and all that, and see if, you know, the Rush model can become, you know, a model in that, or a theory in that regard. It's 2 existing communities that I noticed: communities of geography and communities of interest. The community of geography is about place, which is what, you know, what we speak of generally for local journalism. We want to have more journalists in local areas whose reporting is focused on that area. That is a conversation that we had under CMedia. It's a long conversation. I'm not going to go to it in this particular training, but think about the geography, the community where the health center is, the community where the primary school is, the community where the feeder road, because feeder road is what is under local government. The feeder road is, that has been bad for many years, but because of that small feeder road, 2 communities can now not reach an urban center. So think of geography. Then interest, health, you know, electricity. And I'm saying that, you know, every story is first local. Every story is first local. And so the next phase of that is now to say that I really do believe from experience and from what I've seen that the greatest impact point for any journalistic work is when the communities of geography and community of interest intersect, which is when you are dealing with an area. Let's say you pick Lagos State and you are picking health. If you are able to do a good story, you know, using the data, let's say local area in Lagos State, Onigbongo local government, for instance, using the data that Hamzat has given to us, for instance, if you pick a community, you now do that story. But before you do that story, you are planning, and I'll go to the planning circle shortly. You have planned around your community of interest, because the challenge is that we don't plan, we are not productizing our journalism. And this is something that you can do for almost every story, but it will be challenging to do that rigorous work for every story. So I advise, you know, pick some stories that you really do this on. However, generally just have it in mind to have a simple checklist for regular stories. So if you are able to map for health center, for instance, who are the core stakeholders, and you get uptakers for the stories, you make sure that those stories reach the right people. The challenge with our journalism right now, and part of the reasons why we designed CMedia with MacArthur Foundation support, is that we have national legacy publications generally, even the aggregate sites, the aggregate media organization owners who know that they do not have the capacity to cover the nation. They insist that they are national rather than being niche, where they can, you know, focus on a particular issue and do it very, very well within their midst. But because they are generalists, everybody is tooting the same thing. But if you are able to localize the story in the real sense of it, your impact is going to be higher as a journalist and as a media organization. And what I often say here, and I'll add it to this note before it is passed round, is that, see, politics is local. We've heard that many times. You may have also heard development is local. If you really want to develop a country, you have to break that development down. That is why, as long as we struggle with local governance as a country, we would always be having the charade that we have at the national level as politics. Because, yes, the INEC provision, for instance, says that political parties can have consensus candidates. But a situation where every political party only has consensus party may indicate some fundamental errors in what we call democracy, because is democracy not about participation and voting and people making decisions about who they decide to go on? Because sometimes consensus is that we have now all gotten on the same page of corruption. So that was a digression, but I'm just saying that if politics is local, development is local, journalism that has to make a difference must be local. And so you'll see that in many countries where democracy is strong, there is strong local journalism. And Rush is a local journalism model. Because it's a model for development and impact. It has to be in so many ways focused on that. So what do I say about the Rush strategy? I've spoken about some of them, so I'll breeze through. I see that I have 15 minutes to go. Think of people, focus on audience and their needs. So think people, don't just slam the president on every picture, as their picture for every story. How about the people? How about the well that you said is dry? So sometimes I have mentored investigative reporters and served as editor for investigative works. And descriptive journalism is one of the gaps, in addition to the gaps, many gaps that Ajibola has highlighted. People just don't describe. You said that a community has lacked power for 7 years. And then all of your reports that you call investigative is somebody said, another person, said, somebody lamented. How about the description, you describing what you saw as a reporter? If a community lacks power supply, there is a deadness that you feel in the community. There's the noise of the generator that you will hear. If you say that an area there's economic recession and there's a challenge with, there'll be closed shops with padlocks. How about just doing that basic field, just being a reporter and describing what you saw to us without opinionating, describing when I got into the town, the well was dry, the stream was, they said, people, you cannot say people said that, this river used to flow and whatever, but now, it is a smaller river, talking about climate change and all of it. So you have to think of the people and the needs. You have to treat journalism as both an art and a science. Sometimes we treat journalism too much as the art. You follow the story, but before you start following, plan, have a strategy, invest in knowledge. I've worked with too many journalists who are not interested in reading about what they want to publish. They are not interested in knowledge. They are not interested. They just want to get voices, as many voices as possible, a collection of voices, and call it a story report. You have to just sit down and understand the challenges so that you can have nuance. I say that credibility is your unique selling point. Ethics is a whole topic. I won't go into it. Treat your sources as resource persons. What do I mean here? Ajibola told you about sources, and some of you have asked questions about sources. A lot of times we just go to our sources to fill the pages and reports. But sometimes, away from crisis period, it is good. And even when you want to do an investigative report, just go and sit. When we did our regulators monitoring program focused on electricity and education, I spent a lot of time as a programs person designing, and as an editor, someone who edits a lot of, investigative work. I spent a lot of time just sitting with experts, just listening. How does electricity work? What is the value chain of electricity? And WSIJ teaches the value chain of, thematic areas as part of our modules a lot, just because we are a knowledge-focused organization. And one of the people I went to sit with was Sam Amadi, the former NEC chairperson, and I sat with him, and it just taught me, what are the challenges, what is happening, what do you think about journalists, what do you think about news reports. I even got recommendations from him on journalists that I can work with. An interesting fact, a quick digression, he told me he recommended a journalist. By the time I reached the journalist and included him, the journalist told me that Sam Amadi does not like me at all because I always do investigative story. But the truth is that even if somebody is acting like they don't like you, when you do good investigative work, you will always be respected. Unknown to him, Sam Amadi respected him so much because he always did good work. He asked the right question. But Sam Amadi is also a regulator who has his at that time, had his government things to protect. So just treat the people you call sources, treat them like resource persons, learn from them. The example I make sometimes is that if you have reported, let's say there is such a bit, and internationally we have sometimes more specific bits. Like I met a media organization in, I believe it was Denver, at the Collaborative Summit last year or the year before, Collaborative Journalism Summit. And I met a journalist, a media organization, a niche media organization that covers news on prisons, specifically inmates. So even if you cover inmates, something as specific as inmates, and you have covered prisons for 20 years, you don't become the warder or become, a prisoner because you are such a good journalist. That is why your sources will always be important, and you should treat them as, resource repositories, people who can teach you a lot, so that your stories are nuanced, so that you're asking the right people the right question. Ajibola started by saying that sometimes you are demanding accountability from the person who does not have authority to deliver it to you. So sometimes they read our reports and they will laugh. You're asking the president what you should ask a local government chairperson. Of course, the president's office would ignore you, and they will also asterisk you as an unserious media organization or unserious journalist. So look at that. Trace the issue to its communities. Go to the root of the story. Build urgency to follow up. So in these days, you can build urgency on digital platforms. You can build urgency with discussions in media organizations. There's a lot to go through. So I'm going to skim a lot of things. The Rush modules were doing bigger things around it as an organization, and the Rush itself is also an autonomous organization that is embedded right now within the WSCIJ. These are modules that I will teach for quite a long time. So allow me to rush through for this particular one, and perhaps if you have other trainings. Also, I talked about means to an end. Very, very importantly, think about other people. If you're a media organization or you're an editor, think about how your very massive investigative story can become spoken word, how you can collaborate to do a film. WSIJ we want to do more collaborations in this regard. How it can become a film. We have done collaboration with cartoonists before. We have done collaboration with photojournalists, before. How you can make it a campaign online, just so that, the shelf life of the story. Then think technology. Technology can help amplification, right now. At the moment, WSIJ team, I am on. Okay, there's a repeat of a slide there, so I'll remove it before we send it. But the Rush cycle, I'm on the Rush cycle, the Rush idea cycle, and I won't speak to everything because Ajibola has covered some. I'll just mention them. You have the story idea. It's a whole topic on its own. How do you pitch? How do you plan your story? How do you map your sources? How long your story will take? What resources you need to do your story? It just helps to be a bit scientific so that you have a plan. And if, for instance, you have other responsibilities, you can plan towards achieving your story. So story planning, then you do your field work, you publish. Then think about the fact that, that your published story, if it is able to have some metamorphosis, think of the egg, the butterfly going from an egg to a butterfly. At the butterfly level, it's the people will notice it more. It is able to pollinate. It's able to do a lot more. So just think of that. Pass the baton on to other people. Civil society. There was a story that we did at the WSIG. Number one, we did it with other media organizations. We published, and then there are stories that we've done. We passed on to advocacy groups. Those advocacy groups now went to those communities to ask the government and those people who are leaders of the community, why does this community not have light? You collected so amount of money. What is happening? Again, local engagement, so that we don't keep talking. Then follow up. Do update stories. Oh, this has changed. I remember from the past, I think it was 2012, that Peter Nkanga, who is now more in the civil society community. Peter Nkanga is an investigative reporter. He did a story, The Pregnant Teenager. These stories, I'm very excited about them because they are stories that reflect the Rush model. The Pregnant, again, he did, I think, 6 series. And Peter got to a point where by himself, he was sending his story links and writing, now he was acting as a citizen and a passionate journalist. He wrote Lagos State Ministry that I did a story. And that story is about, a pregnant, until that girl who was, impregnated by her uncle and framed from theft and, sent to prison, was gotten out of prison. The uncle was prosecuted, he was sent to prison, and the care of that girl was taken care of. About 5 years after the story, the Wole Soyinka Center followed up on that story, and we found out that, the girl was fine, the Lagos state government was still taking care of her, and that was a great story to see, and finally you get your change and impact. Okay, before Nuruddin reaches me, that I have 5 minutes more, let me run quickly. The follow-up mindset, I won't go to it. Ajibola treated follow-up. I've put some step-by-step follow-up strategy for you to follow. I've spoken about some of them, so I won't go over them again. They had reality, because when I talk about Rush model, one of the things I learned, I treated the Rush model for my fellowship at Stanford. And one of the things I learned from feedback from colleagues and others is that, there's fatigue when you do follow-up. You can get tired. Now you have written the 4th story, yet nothing has changed. Or you have been writing about health for 10 years. That's what is follow-up to. But the health sector in Nigeria is not fundamentally different. It can even be said to be worse in some regard. So you have experienced burnout, you are tired. Sometimes you collaborate, to spread, the fatigue, to spread the risk. It is hard to do. So I'm making that disclaimer early. This is not for the faint-hearted. And even the strong-hearted have to approach it, prepared. I'm on slide 15 now. I've already said that, democracy responds to sustained attention. So I'm at the end, interestingly, of my, I was really, really running. I thought that I had many more slides, but I recall now that I shortened my slide. So I'm just going to talk as I close to just say that, this country needs journalism like never before. And I know that in an artificial intelligence age, we can be looking at all the cons of misinformation, all the cons of, deep fakes, all the cons of even the basic definition of who is a journalist being had. You can stay in that space, but you can also look at all the pros of technology. How, if you design, look at, for instance, I made an example talking to my team yesterday about 2 stories at 2 different, times in history. The story around, the issue is around herbal mixtures. Ololade Olatunji and Akintunde, I'm struggling to remember the surname now. They did the collaborative stories that won the Wole Soyinka Award on herbal mixtures. And they did that story. It was a very impactful story. They did, analysis and all of that of the different samples of herbal mixtures. And they got, government to make some changes. About 10 years later, Kemi Busari does a very similar story, but more specific. And that is what, the Rush model will now make you do. And then a new generation, a new era in history where technology can help you. It did a very similar story. Mama Isha, and Baba Isha about mixture. And he did that story. He did the things that the other team did. But this time he had technology on his side. They tweeted about the story, put the story on many platforms, talked about it in so many places. And eventually, that about mixture company was shut down. But I will take it to another level, which we were raising in the WSIG team. So that particular organization was shut down. But what happens to the fact that herbal mixtures are still on the streets of Nigeria? So if Kemi Busa were on the call, or somebody will know this is a challenge, or somebody else on this call, now do another story, because there have been stories on herbal mixture. They made an impact, but now they made a difference. They had outcomes, but now we are thinking impact level. How do we stop about mixtures that are not regulated? Because we know that there is something such as traditional medicine, which is acknowledged globally, just as orthodox medicine is acknowledged. But how do we ensure that we totally sanitize this space, such that it's not just a Baba Isha herbal mixture company that is shut down, but any herbal mixture that does not meet the required standard does not get to the market? So that's another level of story. And when you are doing that level of story, you must have the grace to acknowledge other stories, because that is another thing journalists need to do more of. We don't read stories of other great journalists who have done good work on that particular issue where we want to do our story. We start our story as if it's a first of its kind, an innovation. But your innovation, it has to acknowledge what was built before. If the people who manufactured cars did not acknowledge what the people who were using cats and horses and the old model cars were doing, they will not be able to build on it. Innovation builds on existing ideas. So as journalists, let us report until something happens. And our communities are begging for our addition. My last statement would be that I also believe very strongly that funding, that sustainability challenges that journalism has at the moment can be resolved with the Rush model, because you can design in such a way that locally and internationally you become a source for news. You become a source for news because you always have unique content. You always have unique investigations, and you are dealing with people directly, not just the president and the governor and the people in political office, but you are dealing with the people. And increasingly, the face of and voice of our news has to be more people focused. Thank you so much for your time. I'll take questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Motorayo. Thank you for that engaging and practical session. It's really, you've said a lot of things that you mentioned about politics that is local. Development is also local. The journalism, that stands to make the difference must also be local. You also talked about that every story is first local. You mentioned a lot of things, and I'm very happy that we can have that insight, from what people are dropping as questions. So we have a lot of questions for you and also for Amzat, but we can find a way to do that. So the first one is that someone was asking that we are talking about the follow-up. Yes, we have to follow up. But however, he said, yes, follow-up matters, but most times those that are supposed to be held accountable after don't avail themselves for questioning what can be done in this case. So in a situation whereby people that we have to hold accountable, they are not turning up, what can we do as local journalists in that regard?
Okay, thank you. So when you were asking that question, I don't know if Ajibola recalls when we did the project on the media for oil reform with the Natural Resource Governance Institute. And I recall that Ajibola himself had an investigative story. If you recall, Ajibola, that he had an investigative story to do. I think it was around NNPC, if I remember clearly. And he investigated and did all the things he wanted to do. And at the end of the day, we decided to write about the frustration of getting access to information. Adebola, do you recall?
Okay.
The frustration around getting access to information and how opaque the institutions and the people who we should hold accountable in the oil and gas sector are, how opaque they are. So I make that example to first acknowledge that we have the situation where it is difficult. Accountability, the impunity is high. But I address the issue. We have to then write the story for the people to respond. When the people respond, and you put, Adebola talked about keeping evidence, tracking evidence of your emails, your interaction with partners, with resource persons, with people in authority. If you give timelines, there are stories you write and you give timelines, you do follow-up stories about timelines on engaging this person who is supposed to be the representative of a community, who has now become totally unreachable in a matter concerning his community. By the time the story goes out, the people will ask him questions, then he must answer. Sometimes it is your investigative story or your follow-up story that would force authorities to answer. But I also agree with Ajibola, and that is that you cannot always say that your sources are anonymous. You have to find the sources. You have to find the places where they have made promises. You have to find documents that binds them to those promises. But it is you turning it to something that the people are now demanding. The people have outrage. The people are sensitized that there is something that is amiss here. You will most likely get response because politicians do not like an agitated citizens. They don't like agitated citizens or an agitated community.
All right. Thank you so much for that. But before we read more questions, we've dropped a link on the chat box for people to help us to access that. That is our post-assessment training form. It's very, very important. We have 265 participants on this call, and we expect everyone to fill this form. It is very important to us at WSCIJ. Please just try to find the link. It will be dropped again for us to click on that and have our post-training assessment. Is very, very important. Please help us to do that. So another question we have here is, someone is asking that how can a radio presenter, do to make stories to be more engaging, our stories to be more engaging. But I think that it's not a matter of engaging now, it's about making an impact. Maybe I have to rephrase that question because it's about impact. Rush is about impact. So how can a radio presenter, make our stories to have more impact? Yeah, I think that is what the person is trying to say. Please don't forget the post-assessment training form is on the on the chat. Let's just try to click that and do that. Within 1 or 2 minutes, we are done with the form. Thank you. We'll try over to you.
Okay, I'll answer the question, but let me just lend a voice to the post-assessment training form. A lot of people do not fill the form. We need your response because as an organization too, we're learning organization. We need your feedback. What can be better? What can be removed? What needs to be? What we need to remove, and all of that. So please give us your feedback. Help us to fill the form. Just take the time out. Resource persons have taken time out to be on this call to do the training. They will also like to get feedback on what you think about that training and what can improve for other trainees in future. For the question, the person would have me go over all of my presentation again, because that is the presentation I made. But let me just also answer by saying that from the beginning, when you are doing your story planning, you need to be identifying who are major stakeholders for your story. Who are the off-takers? Like I was speaking to, but I didn't finish. You treat the story like it's a product. You are producing notebooks. Who are the users of notebooks? How would they get the notebook? How would they get the notebooks? How would they how would they use the notebooks? Is the notebook usable? Is it functional? Would they be able to write on it if you used glossy paper to do notebook? Eventually, most pens cannot write on glossy paper, so most people can't write on it. So I'm just speaking from the product sense of things, and that is why, you know, sometimes rush might be high level for some people because you have to just bring strategy into it. You are thinking strategy, you are planning, but be careful. One of the things I say when we have more time for teaching on rush is that the journalists and the advocates are two different people. Sometimes journalism is a form of advocacy. However, the journalist is not supposed to become an advocate. And advocates are often hardliners. They have chosen a cause to preach, quote unquote, about, and they will always preach about it. Journalists do not preach. Journalists, you know, stay with the facts. That is why sometimes your story might show, and if you do the Rush model well, sometimes your story will show that the accountability lies with the people in some regard. That the people, for instance, are vandalizing, you know, electrical appliances and fixtures, and because of that, their area does not have electricity. People will remove the railings of bridges and go and use it to make spoon and pots. They will remove the covers of manholes. Those people must be held accountable because they are risking our lives together. So when you do your proper planning, you are able to write nuanced story. There is a depth of nuance in many stories, and we need to bring nuance to stories. But planning and strategy will help you achieve this. I hope it's helpful to the person.
All right. Thank you so much, Motunrayo. Thank you so much. We also have a similar question, but I think you've already answered it because the person asked that how can a broker journalist adapt this rush model? So I think that's what you have also explained about, you know, them to try to map out their stories, who are their stakeholders, and how they can make this more effective. Now we are moving on to a quick reminder again for the participants. Please help us to fill that form. It's very important. It is very important, just like how, you know, the ED mentioned. So we are now moving to the light bulb moment, where we expect our participants to also share with us one or two things, their key takeaways, and for us to know, you know, how we've done so far and what they intend to apply, you know, to their work. While we are waiting for them to drop that in the chat box, I have a question for Mr. Hamzat from the participant. So the person is asking that how do reporters balance public interest with legal risk defamation? So we are talking about public interest journalism that we want to do, or we are focusing on doing, and how do we try to strike a balance, and for us not to go and commit legal offense in terms of defamation. So how can we make a balance, Mr. Hamzat?
Okay, thank you very much, Nuruddin. So it's a very simple question to answer. Even the lawyers know that truth is a defense against a defamation. So all you need to prove in court that your story did not defame anyone is to show the truth or the fact in your story. And that is why I emphasized on evidence. So, and to also cross-check the evidence that you have, because even it is not all the evidence that can stand the test of scrutiny. So when you are doing your story, be the first editor of your story. Look at all the claims, because that's where the problem usually arises. It is a claim that litigants usually latch on. What claim are you making here? So if you say, I am a pedophile, that's a very huge claim. So I want to see how you are able to prove that that claim is truthful. And that leads us to the evidence and the quality of the evidence that you provide. So it is not just enough to say that I think you are a pedophile because I saw you with a young girl of below 18 in your room. That's pretty much how do they call it? It's an evidence on the face of it, but that evidence needs to be checked for that. Does it mean that when somebody is with a woman, a young lady, that automatically translates to a rape? You might need to want to start check that evidence to show that you have something that can be tested and that can be admissible in court. If the evidence you are providing is not admissible or is not tested in court, then you might run into the risk of being sued for defamation and you won't be able to get out of it. So it goes down to the quality of the evidence that you provide for a story. I hope that helps.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Amzat. So we also have another question here, and I think Mutra should go for that. Somebody is saying that education is facing a lot of issues, but sourcing ideas is a problem that still persists for me. The person is saying that. But even from the question, I don't want to preempt you, but even from the question, the person is saying that it's facing a lot, that is educational sector. But even from there, you can be able to look for ways to get your stories ideas. But let me just give it to Mutra to explain more on that. So he's saying that the person is saying that education is facing a lot of issues, but sourcing ideas is a problem that still persists for the person. Yeah.
I am uncertain that I get that question. Is the person saying that finding story ideas, talking about story ideas, for the education sector?
So I think the person is trying to make mention of getting sources, probably to speak to that educational issues, as a journalist.
Oh, there are many, many, many sources. So on sources, when I have opportunity to train around sources, I'll just attempt it because, like I said at the beginning, whatever Ajibola and I say, it would only be what we can, make available in a 2-hour training session. But things are deeper than that. On sources, there is also there are so many sources. Education sector is one of the sectors, so many issues, so many people, so many sources. Sometimes we narrow our sources to government sources alone. You have to broaden your source base if it's a public school, the teachers, head of schools, a lot of times they are civil servants, so they are not going to say things that they have no permission to say. So that can be a challenge. But again, if you get the people speaking, you get the parents speaking, you get with permission, because if you are dealing with anything below tertiary education, you are probably dealing with minors. So with permission from their parents, if you get students speaking, if you get the community where the school is located speaking, those people in government who do not speak will have to speak, because now the communities that vote for them are asking the questions. They're asking the question. But there's also a tendency to already overuse some sources. So let us also think out of the box for sources. And let us also, there are so many, when you talk about sourcing, you talk about people sources and you talk about document sources, the evidences that Ajibola Amzat has spoken about. For document sources, let us also look to the academia. There are so many research reports that are lying on shelves of, supervisors, project supervisors, and in libraries of universities that can become some secondary research background for you, because many of them actually use proven research methodology to come to that. So there are things there that you can pick from. But if you broaden who you call your sources, and you speak to the people who are going to demand accountability, and they get interested in that story, government sources will have no choice but to speak.
All right, thanks so much, Motrayo.
And let me quickly add to that, Nurdin, because it's a very important point. So in my view, this is where And the rush methodology that Motoya was talking about is also very, very critical. There should be a method to our madness as a journalist. So if you can just have that kind of a strategic approach, even in mapping your source or in cultivating sources. One of the things I always encourage our colleagues to do is to develop a sheet, a Google sheet of sources. And then you can list all the possible sources. And bear in mind that not all the sources are going to be willing to speak to you. Some will agree to speak. After some time, they will bail out on you. So you have to be mindful of that. That's why you need to have a chart or a sheet for all the sources, those possible ones and those ones that are not likely to speak to you. And cultivating sources is very, that's another skill that good journalists learn how to do. You can cultivate sources. And how do we do that? When we go to events, you don't go to just go and find stories. When you go to events, a journalist goes to go and build your sources basis. That's where you meet so many people you would not have met in ordinary life. You meet ministers, you meet DGs, you meet advocates, you meet different people. That is one place where you can actually build your sources, and then you cultivate some of these sources when necessary, reaching out to them from time to time. I have a number of people that if I need information in certain places, I can always reach out. If they don't have that information, they will put you in contact with somebody who might help you to have that information. So source building, source cultivation is very, very important. But there must be a strategy to it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much for this insightful contribution. And so we have another question here, and I think this is a very, if I can call it a big question. Someone is saying that is from Idibia Gabriel. He said, we have a terrible situation in hand where the source of your investigation turn out to hunt for you when the story is published, even after giving you his own side of the story before the publication. And his response is well represented. Is caring to journalists for further with investigation news, fearing meeting the sources for his life. Is it not better to remain with low-profile source alone? So Gabriel is kind of confused. So are we to go after the high-profile sourcing or just stay low because we don't want to have a threat to our life or a threat to our work? So how can we strike a balance? I want your insight, both Motunrayo and Ajibola. Yeah, thank you. So Motunrayo, you can go first.
Yeah, ladies first.
Ladies first. Let's do that for presidency and governorship. So I was actually going to say, let us turn this over to editor. You understand? Let us turn it over to editor because on ground experience, I have things to say based on stories that we have commissioned, and even the fact that you have your evidences. Ajibola already mentioned that. The fact that sometimes you also get reports. If somebody is threatening you, you should report to the police. So the fact that you're a journalist, sometimes journalists forget that there are provisions of the law for situations. And so we just stay within the newsroom and say, oh, I'm getting threat calls or somebody is threatening me, and you don't follow the provisions of the law. If somebody is threatening, you make a police report. You make you get a court restriction. You do all of those things. Also, something that is important that we have other modules for, and I'm sure CCIJ or even Ajibola in the course of the career would have done trainings on, is your language when you are doing investigative reports matters. I mentioned, in passing, opinionating, and sometimes we just use adjectives. You have to approve your reports such that you are not saying what the source did not say. You are not
Hello, Motunrayo, can you hear me? Amzad, please, can you confirm? Can you hear me or can you hear Motunrayo? Hello?
I can hear you, but I cannot hear Motunrayo again.
Oh, I think that is network issues. Hopefully she will join us shortly. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry if you can hear me. Can you please, go ahead with your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, thank you, Nurdin. So I think talking about sources, there is, in my view, there is nothing like big or small sources in terms of should we go for smaller ones so that we don't incur the wrath of the big sources. I don't think that's how it works. I think originally it depends on the story that you're doing. There's hierarchy of sources. And when we're talking about the hierarchy of sources, you want to ask who are the people who really should know, who have the information that you need for your story. So it should be about the right person who has the information for the story that you know. So, or who are the people who witnessed the accounts you are reporting, the first witness, the high witness. So those are the key sources in your story. It has nothing to do with somebody is big and somebody is small. It has more to do with who has the information that you need to tell a story. And I also want to say that journalists should never be intimidated by anybody. In my career, I really don't see any source that's too big to reach out to. I think it's also a mentality thing. If you have access, if you have contact of any source that is relevant to your story, you should not be afraid to reach out to that person, whoever he is. I think Mr. Gabashew, he probably hears my name, he will know that we're like a torture to the government of Buhari when we were never afraid of anybody in the presidency when we're doing story for ICI there. And the last point I will make is that some of these so-called big guys, they might not be as intimidating as you think. When you come closer to them, when you meet them at events, you don't realize that they are just as ordinary as you think. Recently, there's a story I joined some team in my organization to do about the African presidents lobbying Trump administration, and we're using, some of those organizations that have links with Trump's. So it requires that I speak to different leaders of African countries. I've been trying to pull out the name of that guy. I think the president of Mozambique. I reach out to him. This guy never knows me from Adam. I don't know. I've never spoken, but I reach out to him. And he responded. And then I fire back another question. And he responded, I've never been to Mozambique in my life. I don't know where in Africa Mozambique is located. But I'm having a conversation with the president of Mozambique. If you are intimidated by any president or anyone, you think that they are too big to answer a question. I don't think that mentality also, I think that mentality also needs to shift. That would be my response to the question by the journalist.
Oh, all right, thank you. So, Motrayo, you were saying something. You are trying to, give answers to those questions before you had network glitches. So now that you are back, can you just wrap that up, in a minute? And also, just to speak to that shortly, someone is saying that just a kind of a follow-up question so they can just attend to the two at once. Said the fear of witch hunting is one of the reasons why some of us shy away from accountability reporting. In this case, how do we handle threats? So just to balance it together with the first one you are trying to answer before you had network glitches.
Okay, so I won't try to go over them. Ajibola has, has given additions to whatever I said before, and it's comprehensive for the time that we have. Again, if you have threats, please report. For someone to threaten you with attack, it's criminal. So you report to the authorities that take up criminal issues. Also, carry your editor along. I don't know if Ajibola probably already mentioned this, carry your editor along. Sometimes, we do things on our own. Also, ensure that the way you are relating to your source is not also from being, and I'm just saying practical things that we have seen, it's not from a point of view being superior, such that you are also, you are doing a story because, a governor stole, and then you're having conversations like, oh, I'll do my story and, you will be out of office. and you are having that conversation with that person, you are not in your story. Can get a person out of office, but that is not the process of getting people out of office. They have to still go through, what democracy requires. So those things can be taken as subtle threats. When you say, oh, when I do my story, you'll be in jail. You don't need those conversations. Just focus. Your story is supposed to be if money is stolen, it's not just about the fact that money is stolen. It is what it denies people. It is what it denies people. It is the public interest that becomes denied because corruption is happening in a space. So focus on your own focus. Then threat comes with the terrain. Sometimes people will just threaten for the sake of it. Like when you speak to strategic litigations, that come just because you are a reporter, and the litigations are not because you are liable or because you have used defaming language, or they are because you are just in journalism and people want to frustrate your journalism. So those kind of threats will also come, but please carry people along. Don't be. This is not a 007 James Bond endeavor. You have to, and please be safe. If in good organizations, I mean, there are good organizations that may not be aware. In organizations where the awareness exists, there's risk assessment that is done before you get into doing a particular story. So do the risk assessment. If it is totally unsafe, it might be something you want to move to another media organization, or sometimes another partner who may not have the kind of exposure to life-threatening challenges that you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I have the final question because our time is well fast spent, but this question is more important to me. Why? Is because, or even to the center, because it's more of ethical. And the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, we are ethical based, and that is one of our core mandates. Because as a journalist, you have to be ethical, because that is the baseline of whatever you are doing. So we have a question on ethics. So someone is saying that in a situation where your sources says many things that are germane to your story off record, what do you do? So they are telling, of course, I think that is well spelled out. So what do you do? So we have the ethical issue to balance. How do we do that? And these their sources are very germane to your story, what they said, but off record. How do we do that?
Over to you, Mr. Ajibola Hamzat.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's right. So it depends on the kind of sources that you are speaking with. Because when some source who have the mandate to speak, like the spokesperson, you are interviewing and say he can only speak off record. That's a bit problematic. So you need a bit of negotiation there. And recently I've had that with the spokesperson of the NIDCOR when I was doing a story about the Nigerians and fighting in Russia. So part of the conversation was that, look, I'm not going to ask a number of questions off record. And I said, okay, let's discuss. Which one can you answer on record? And which one can you answer off record? So we had that conversation. And those one you think you cannot answer on record, can you suggest another officials that will not have reprisal that can speak to it on record? So it refers me to the Foreign Affairs Ministry. So we had that negotiation. You can use the same thing, because indeed some people want to give information, but they know that the very moment that information is traced to them, they are going to lose their job the next day, or they will post them to Zamfara, or they will just do something even more worse. So you have to take care of that. But it is always good to handle for on record information, because if most of your information in your story is provided by anonymous source, it leaves room for credibility and crisis. People can easily doubt your story. So you want to make sure that as you are going out, you don't want information that is off record. But if it happens that you are going to get a very vital information, but you can only get that vital information on the conditions of off record, then you can do some negotiation with the person and also ask the person to lead you to where else or who else has that kind of information. Because probably it's not the only person who has that information. So who else can actually speak to that issue? So that could be the way to navigate that problematic situation.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Ajibola. Mutra, do you have any, maybe a sentence to speak to that? All right.
I'm good.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you so much. So, about the post-assessment form, please let's ensure that we fill the form. It is very, very important. As we are coming to the end of the session, it's very, very important. And also, we are, making a call. I'm very sure that will have been shared on the platform, on the chat. So we want people to send in their story proposals. Click on the link and, let us have your ideas and, let's see what you intend to do. It is very, very important. And make sure that if you don't fill the post-assessment form, you may not likely get, response from us on that. So it's very, very important that you fill the post-assessment form because it's very crucial to us. It's very important, for our internal assessment. It is very, very important. So ensure that you fill the two forms so that we can have that in our database. It's very, very important. Yeah, thank you so much. A lot has been said for the two, sessions. A lot. Even my notes here is, is speed up. I just have to, run through some of these things. So it's more or less like kind of a recall or a recap for the participants. We have the first session is from Ajibola, then the second session is from Motunrayo. So politics is local, also development. So journalism that have to make the difference must also be local. Motunrayo talked about we are not producalizing our journalism. So if we can't make our story to be local, we can't make an impact. So we have to make it local because she said that every story is first local. And we have to do a follow-up, when you publish a story to ensure impact. Without doing that, you won't get an impact. So, and we have to ensure that what we have to track your stories is very, very important. So let's keep this going. And of course, the C media is not a one-off something, the training. So this is our second, training on C media project for this year. We had something earlier on AI. So this is another, session on C media training. So of course, we have more sessions coming up. That is the reason why we need to have our database for the assessment form. So please ensure that you fill this form. Is very, very important to us. For us to do a more follow-up with you guys. And just like what we have been saying about Rush model. So we have to keep on do the following up. It's very, very important. Let me just give us a few minutes for those of us that are yet to fill those two forms, please help us to do that as soon as possible. It's also be reshared on the chat box again for those people that might have missed out, on that. So the time is fast, but this is 16 minutes, past 1, and it's supposed to end by 1, between 11 to 1. So please, let's fill the form. We have not do that. It's very, very important. While we are waiting for them to fill the form, I want to sincerely appreciate, our facilitators for their time, for their, for their knowledge, for everything they put into it, because it is very important and very dear to the center for we having you on board. Mr. Ajibola Hamzat, thank you so much. We really appreciate. Motunrayo Alaka, thank you so much for your time. And I'm very sure that this is not the ending of this. We have to do a follow-up. And also for the participants, the slide will be shared with you. Yeah, so that you can able to go back and digest and apply all these trainings to what you intend to do is very, very important. So on that note, I want to say a big thank you to participants as well, because without you, we can't have this training. For your time. It's over 2 hours, and you see guys are still on call. As of now, we have 273 participants on the call. So it's very, very impressive, and we really appreciate your time and your quest for knowledge. So thank you so much, and I hope that the next time we also put this call out, you can get your response and your passion to do this with us. Is very, very important. And also I also have to appreciate the WSCIJ team for putting this together, because it is not a one-man show. It is the teamwork behind this. On that note, we are saying a big thank you, and thank you once again for joining this session. Thank you, Jibola. Thank you, Moturayo. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Bye.
all.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you,
All right.
Nurdin. Thank you, everyone. Saraka, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.